So I just watched the new Plankton movie that's exclusively on Netflix right now a couple days ago, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. Like genuinely, this was a really good movie, and yeah, like I've not been able to stop thinking about it, and so like I was just like, man, I really need to make a video on this and get my thoughts out there, because yeah, the Plankton movie surprisingly really good. So yeah, this is going to be more or less kind of a review type video where I just talk about all the things that I thought worked about the movie, things that didn't work, and ultimately, hopefully, try and convince some other people to watch this movie because this is like the best SpongeBob anything probably in like years. So with all that said, let's just get right into it. The first thing I really want to talk about is the music, because that's really what makes this movie over everything else. The music is like phenomenal, and I know that sounds kind of weird. Like classic SpongeBob has some memorable songs. You got like the F is for Friends, the fun song. You got like the ripped pants song and stuff like that. It's very iconic, but I mean, it's not really the type of stuff that I would necessarily want to like add to my playlist to like jam down to. It's good for what it is in the episodes, but beyond that, I'm not really going out of my way to listen to those songs. But there's like a couple songs in this movie that I've genuinely like added to my playlist. Like I have listened to them ad nauseum on repeat. Like it's genuinely really good. The best one, and this is actually the whole reason I watched the movie, is because I found a clip that had Karen's theme song in it. So Karen, is Plankton's robotic wife, and she has a music number called "Say My Name." I'm not going to play it here because I don't want to get a copyright strike. But if you just go into the YouTube search bar and type in, Karen, "Say My Name," or something like that, it should come up. And like it's a banger. Like genuinely, it's like a really good like villain song for Karen. You look at like a lot of recent Disney movies and people be like, "Oh, how come like we don't get good villain songs anymore?" Like Wish, like a lot of people thought that villain song was like really a letdown. But no, Karen is like a bad A in this movie. Like she is an amazing villain, and they give her this really sick song. So yeah, go look that one up. And also at the end of the movie, during the credits, a song plays about Karen and Plankton's relationship called "You and Me." So look that one up too. Another really really good song from the movie. Just type in like "You and Me" song Plankton, and it'll probably come up. But yeah, this is another like both of these feel like they could be like legit like pop songs that play on the radio. Like I'm not even joking. Like look it up for yourself. Maybe you'll listen and be like, "Oh, this sucks. What's this guy talking about?" But no, the music is like really, really good in this. Don't be put off like if you first watch the movie. It starts off with like SpongeBob singing a little musical ditty that's kind of like very hokey, like sort of like 1920s sounding, or it's just like a bikini bottom at the bottom of the ocean, da 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 do. But that's kind of that song's kind of whatever. I don't really care for that one particularly. But they kind of SpongeBob gets cut off, like the movie freezes, and it's kind of a fourth wall breaking moment, kind of like Cusco from Emperor's New Groove or something, where then like Plankton, was like, wait a minute, I thought this was supposed to be my movie. But yeah, after that song, the music it goes way up from there. So yeah, really big fan of those two songs. The "You and Me" song, it reminds me of like that. Like if you listen to the lyrics and stuff, it's kind of like that. That Gautier song, if I'm pronouncing it right. That you didn't have to cut me off, make out like it never happened, and that we were nothing. Because the song, it kind of gives you the two different perspectives of like Karen's perspective and Plankton's perspective in their relationship. Because that's kind of the whole theme of this movie is their relationship. But yeah, just to kind of get into the premise of this movie, which we've already kind of hinted at, Karen is the main villain. Essentially, Plankton pushes her too far, and Karen's just like, all right, I've had enough of Plankton's crap. So she kind of like sets out to basically just take over the whole world. I guess just purely motivated out of spite toward Plankton. But yeah, her musical number is kind of this whole song about how Plankton's, taking her for granted, and that like she's the real like evil mastermind behind everything, and Plankton's nothing without her. It's kind of a diss track in a way. but it's really good. And Karen kind of steals the show through this whole movie. So like SpongeBob and Plankton are kind of having to work together to to stop Karen and from SpongeBob's perspective, save Bikini Bottom. Of course, Plankton doesn't really care about all that. He just wants to stop Karen. But it's a really interesting dynamic, and I kind of like that because it's not a thing of like they have this big like falling out, and it's not a thing where like SpongeBob, he's really concerned with trying to like fix Plankton and Karen's relationship, but I kind of like how Karen and Plankton are both just like, no, this isn't repairable. We just want to like kill each other, like genuinely, like that's kind of their mission. Is like Plankton wants to kill Karen and Karen wants to kill Plankton. So I kind of like that dynamic. I don't know why. I just think that's kind of fun instead of being, because we've seen other episodes of SpongeBob before where like Karen and Plankton have an altercation, and then it's like oh, SpongeBob's got to help Plankton win Karen back, but like in this, Plankton doesn't want that. He's just like, no, I'm just out for full vengeance here. So that's kind of a fun dynamic. But in this video, we are going to go into spoilers about the movies. Just be aware of that. So if you haven't seen it already, then maybe stop this video, go watch it. But then be sure to come back because viewer retention is very important, and it's really going to hurt the algorithm if you only get this far and then don't come back. So, but yeah. So with that all out of the way, again, we are going to get into spoilers here. So let's talk about some of them. One of the things that I really love about this movie, so in like the classic SpongeBob and like the first 3 seasons, there's this running gag where like Mr. Krabs will defeat Plankton, he'll flick him away or something and send him back to the chum bucket, and as Plankton is flying away, he'll say like I went to college. In this movie, we actually go to Plankton's college. I love that. I think that's awesome. Like they've been referencing it for years. And like I remember even thinking a while back, like legitimately, I don't remember when, but like several months ago, I was thinking like they've done so many SpongeBob episodes, like what could they realistically do that they haven't done already? Because a lot of times even there'll be a new episode comes out and it's kind of like they're regurgitating old stuff. Like this was a plot from an episode from like 10 years ago where like, you're making an episode all about this character that was this one-off character from like 15 years ago instead of like coming up with original ideas. But I thought that was great. Like I remember thinking to myself, like, well, how come? What if we got an episode where like we actually see where Plankton went to college, and we get that in this movie, and it's not like I don't know, they're maybe there for like 10 minutes. It's not like a significant bulk of the movie. But it was really cool to get that like origin story, and like there's a lot of flashbacks in this where you get to see how Plankton and Karen first met. He actually created Karen. He built this robot to be his. I guess Karen's the OG AI companion, right? But it really kind of makes you feel for Plankton because like he's young and he kind of feels like an outcast, like among his family. That there's a lot of great callbacks to earlier seasons in this. Like we see Plankton's family, and they're all like the redneck like hillbillies from like the Plankton's Army episode in season 3. It's like it's cousin Plankton. It's so you see them again, so that's pretty cool. I like that a lot. And Plankton, he kind of has more ambitions than everybody. He wants to like go off and get a college education, and they all think that's like silly. So he leaves home, and then he gets into, college, and he's kind of an outcast there too. So he's like never really had anybody. So it's genuinely kind of like sad when he builds Karen. He starts singing this song because like he didn't build Karen to be his lover necessarily, at least not initially. That's not how it started out. Because he builds Karen, and then he sings this song where he's just like so happy to have a friend. Like that's all he wanted. That's what he built Karen for. And he even builds her with this like he installs like 4 chips in her programming, and each chip is like a different facet of her personality. So he gives her like a sassiness chip and a I guess like an evilness chip, but he also gives her an empathy chip, which is shaped like a heart. The reason being because he says he wants her to be able to understand him. And it's like that's genuinely like pretty heartbreaking, man. Like Plankton is just that desperate for somebody to listen to him, to make him feel validated, and to make him feel loved. So it's like, man, that kind of hits a little bit, you know. That's another thing about this movie. It shockingly kind of hits you in the fields, in the feels. Like this is not particularly a funny movie, and when I say that, I don't mean like, oh, they make a bunch of jokes, but they're really cringy and they don't land, and like I just roll my eyes at them. Like, no, this movie just genuinely doesn't really make that much of an effort to make jokes. Like this is a more serious kind of SpongeBob movie, as serious as SpongeBob can be, anyway. I'm not gonna say it's like Oscar worthy, but like it goes places that I'm not used to seeing for a SpongeBob movie, just in terms of the character development, making me feel sympathetic for these characters. It's probably the most like heavy hitting SpongeBob's been ever, with the exception maybe of like I think it's the season 4 episode. Have you seen this, Snail? Where they got that song, where Gary runs away. Gary, I'm sorry I neglected you. Oh, I never expected you to run away and leave me feeling this empty. Your meow right now would sound like music to me. Please come home, 'cause I miss you, Gary. Gary, come home. That bit went on a lot longer than I intended. But yeah, other than that, that's probably the only other SpongeBob moment I can think of that like kind of evokes some pretty strong emotions. Because generally they try to stick to a much more lighthearted, sillier tone. And this movie does have moments of levity, but like it's really a pretty radical departure. It's kind of antithetical to everything SpongeBob is kind of supposed to be, which is just kind of this lighthearted, funny thing. But I kind of like that. I like that they're trying something different and they're going for a more serious tone, and they're not dumbing it down to the least common denominator, thinking that that's what's going to appeal to like the most kids as possible. Because SpongeBob, it's a family show, it's a kids show. But I mean, the first 3 seasons of SpongeBob, you still have people, in their 20s and 30s, sharing memes and like referencing it all the time on Facebook and Twitter or whatever else, because like that's just the impact that SpongeBob left. It became a cultural phenomenon, those early seasons. Like people don't reference the later seasons near as much, because those first 3 seasons are so well written. They really resonated with people as kids, and they carried that into their adulthood. And you can watch the early seasons of SpongeBob and it's still funny. So I appreciate that this movie isn't just a bunch of like, fart jokes or like no, this is like a, I remember seeing a thing one time saying like, if you're writing for children's TV, because that's something I want to do. I really want to be a writer for animation. But I remember hearing someone say, I wish I knew where the quote comes from, but don't talk down to your audience. Don't talk down to the children who are watching it. Talk up to them. Children like to be challenged. They like to be stimulated. So don't just make it, a bunch of dumb, fart jokes or whatever. Like kids can handle a more complex plot. And that's really what they kind of have going on here in the movie. I've seen a lot of people say that this Plankton movie feels like classic SpongeBob, like seasons 1 through 3 of SpongeBob. I honestly don't really agree with that. I agree in the sense that the first 3 seasons of SpongeBob are very well written, and I think this movie's pretty well written too. But just in terms of the tone, it's again a very different vibe, because they go for a much more serious narrative without like all the jokes. Like you watch like the first SpongeBob movie, and it's like, yeah, there's like some serious stuff there. Like, they've got to get back in time to save Mr. Krabs, because he could die if they don't get back in time. But there's just all of this, like, all these moments of levity piled on top of that, where it's a really good movie. But it's much more of a comedy. Like, even though the stakes are high, like Plankton takes over Bikini Bottom, he brainwashes everybody and turns it into Planktopolis. There's just 50 million jokes you're being bombarded by here and there and everywhere, just joke after joke, and that makes the movie great. But this movie takes a very different approach, where it's like, no, the stakes are higher, and like we've got moments of levity sprinkled in there, but were really making you kind of feel the weight of it. And like I said, Karen is a bad A. She steals the show. I love Karen in this movie, and I never thought I would say that because I've never really cared about Karen. I've never been Karen for Karen. You see what I did there. But no, Karen, like she's always kind of had a personality. Like she's always kind of been snarky toward Plankton. But I mean, you can only do so much with Karen, or at least I thought you could, because she's just a computer monitor with like some waves going up and down the screen. It looks like a heart monitor whenever she talks. But in this movie, she actually transforms when she begins her like villain arc, or even more of a villain arc. Because up to this point, she's always just kind of been Plankton's assistant, really. But this time, she's like, no, this is, I'm actually going through with my plan. I'm gonna take over the world, and I'm gonna do it my way because Plankton is a failure. But when she does that, she like transforms into this like alternate form where she has like three screen monitors for heads, and each head has like a different facet of her personality. And they all have like an actual like face on the monitor, so you're actually seeing Karen emote in a way that you really never have in the show before. And that is something that the newer SpongeBob seasons are kind of better about, where they'll sometimes like Karen's monitor will have like a face or something. But yeah, this movie does a really good job in like giving Karen a personality and animating her in a way that she feels, you know, believable, I guess you could say. I don't know if that's the right word, but where she feels alive in a way that she didn't necessarily before. Like more than just an AI with no soul. So they do a really good job at that. Her design in this movie is sick. The way she transforms, it looks so cool. It reminds me a lot, and I'm not the only one who's pointed this out. But if you've played, and spoilers for Mario and Luigi Brothers Ship, if you haven't beaten that game, the design of the final boss is named Reclusa. And if you've played the game and you've seen that final boss and you know what I'm talking about, her design in this movie, it evokes a lot of feelings of that. But Reclusa was like the best part of Mario and Luigi Brothers Ship. Otherwise, a lot of aspects of that game were really kind of a letdown. But the final boss had a really cool design, and it was like, oh, why weren't you doing this the whole rest of the game? This is awesome. And that's kind of how Karen's design is in this movie. But they do it in a way, because like Karen, she steals the show. She's like the best character in the whole movie. And it doesn't feel like people talk about like, the culture wars or whatever, and like, oh, this movie's gone woke because they've got this girl boss character that Karen doesn't feel like that in this movie. It's not like, because if you talk about like the girl bossification of female characters and making them like woke or whatever, look at like Toy Story 4 as an example. I didn't like what they did with Bo Peep, because it just feels like they just completely altered her personality, to make a statement. It's like that doesn't even feel. It feels poorly written. It feels not true to Bo Peep's character. Because like you can have these strong, independent female characters, but you can also have ones. Femininity doesn't need to be put into this very narrow box of one thing or another. You can be, more traditionally feminine. And girly things, and be more passive, or a homemaker or whatever else. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I don't think we should shame anybody one way or the other. But Karen's never been that. She's always kind of, throughout the whole show, it's kind of been a running gag that like Plankton doesn't, kind of ignores her ideas and like kind of does his own thing, or maybe he'll like take credit for one of Karen's ideas. Karen's always been kind of this competent, character who, never really gets to shine because of Plankton's incompetence. And that's really highlighted here in this movie. So it's not a thing of like, well, they completely retconned her personality and made her do like a whole 180 like Bo Peep, to make like a political statement or something that like women, that a woman being more docile or whatever is a bad thing. Like, no, Karen's never been like that. So it feels completely in line with her character. It doesn't feel like a betrayal at all. This is, rather than doing a whole 180 like with with Bo Peep, this just feels like Karen finally living up to her full potential that's always been there. So I think it's great. I don't have a problem with strong female characters if it's done in a way that's authentic, that's believable, that's true to the character, that doesn't feel like it's just trying to make a statement about, you know, whatever. So I think they handle it really, really well. I really enjoy Karen in this movie. Honestly, in the next SpongeBob video game, I want to see Karen as like the final boss because again, her design is so cool in this. It looks so cool. That's the thing about this movie. Like, it's cool, which is not anything I've ever said about SpongeBob before. It's like, even the first three seasons, like, oh, you should watch them. They're funny. You know, they're really entertaining, but cool, not necessarily. But yeah, this movie, I got these notes here that I've wrote down. So I'm just kind of looking here to see what else I want to touch on here. Um, there's some pretty cool callback. I already mentioned, you see Plankton's family in this. There's some fun little callbacks, some like fan service for longtime SpongeBob fans. Not to the point like in some of the later season episodes, they'll do like an entire episode where it's like, it just kind of feels like you're regurgitating the past and you're not like, doing anything new or creative. Like you're just kind of trying to get people to watch just out of nostalgia, like bringing back the old lady from the chocolate bar salesman. They're selling chocolate, from the Chocolate with Nuts episode, or like bringing back Bubble Bass, who was kind of just a one-off character. But I feel like he's in like a lot of modern SpongeBob, and it's like they're kind of milking those old characters to the point where it's like, okay, why not something new? It kind of takes away what made those old episodes special because they were one and done, and then we moved on, and you had another great one-off character. But this movie, it has fun fan service, like with Plankton's family, but it doesn't milk it too much. It's just kind of almost more like Easter eggs, like cameos, there's a part where they, SpongeBob and Plankton are in Plankton's lab, and they're trying to find like a way to beat Karen, and they're going through all of these like past failed experiments of Plankton's, because he has just this whole room that's nothing but that. And so you see like the chum bucket helmet that he used to brainwash people in the first SpongeBob movie, and there's some other stuff there. I want to say there's like a tank and or a like World War One style airplane that kind of look like, or was it World War Two? They didn't have airplanes in World War One, didn't they? Anyway, I think they were from the second SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water. I could be wrong about that. Then you also see like the Goofy Goober restaurant makes an appearance, and you see like the peanut mascot himself shows up for a second. So it doesn't like hijack the plot to like force this nostalgia in your face. It's just kind of there, and it's like, oh, that's neat. I remember that. So that's good. I think they handled that really well. And then let's see, what do I want to talk about next here? So there's a part toward the end of the movie, in the third act, at kind of like the climax. Genuinely, I didn't like cry, but it hit me in the feels. Like it almost brought me to tears. It was a little hokey, a little cliche, I guess, but it's like you just don't expect to see that from SpongeBob because the characters are all so one note and one dimensional, and that works for like a 11-minute episode or whatever. But there's really a lot of character development in this movie, in kind of a shocking way. So like by the end of it, Plankton kind of realizes how he's mistreated Karen, how he's been making her feel, and they talk about Plankton throughout the movie wanting to get the Krabby Patty secret formula. Of course, he's been trying for the past 25 years. Literally, they acknowledge that much time has passed in the movie because SpongeBob came out like 25 years ago. And so they reference that in the movie, that they've been trying for like 25 years to get the Krabby Patty secret formula. And generally in the show, it's kind of more of a thing. Plankton's talked about wanting to take over the world before, but usually that's kind of seen as like a separate goal from getting the Krabby Patty secret formula. But in this one, they kind of drive the point home that Plankton he believes that having the Krabby Patty secret formula is going to be the key to him taking over the world. So that's why he wants the secret formula so bad. It's not just about getting back at Mr. Krabs. It's not just about having a successful restaurant. He thinks that that recipe is going to be instrumental in him taking over the world. Um, but there's this really great moment toward the end of the movie where it's done very dramatically. Like Karen's not facing him; she's like looking away because she's like so done with Plankton, and she says, and earlier in the movie again she's trying to like kill him, but at this point she's kind of given up on that, and she says like very somberly, she's like, here, I know this is all you want. She gets out the Krabby Patty secret formula. She was holding on to it because earlier on she had like taken uprooted the Krusty Krab and Olive Bikini Bottom, so she had her hands on the formula. She gives it to Plankton without even looking back. She's like, here, take it. I know this is all you care about. This is all you want. So take it and just go away. Just leave me alone, And Plankton, he takes the formula because it's in its glass bottle, like a message in a bottle. He smashes it. He breaks the glass, and he says to Karen, he says, the secret formula is you. And it's like, it's kind of hokey, it's kind of cheesy, it's kind of cliche, but that genuinely hit me. Like, I did not expect that from SpongeBob, that he just tosses away the secret formula. He's like, Karen, you have been the secret formula to my success. If I'm ever going to take over the world, it's going to be with you. You're the secret formula to taking over the world. And it kind of hit me. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, that's the most profound statement I've ever heard in an episode of SpongeBob. So I really liked that. SpongeBob himself as a character, I liked his role in this movie because again, he kind of tags along with Plankton. So he's with Plankton throughout pretty much the whole movie as they work together to try to stop Karen. But I thought what they did with SpongeBob was really good. He didn't feel shoehorned in there of like, oh, this is a SpongeBob movie, so we have to have SpongeBob there for marketing purposes to keep the kids happy, so they're not like, where's SpongeBob? No, SpongeBob is like integral to the plot. SpongeBob, he's also not like a complete idiot like a lot of modern SpongeBob makes him out to be. Because even in the old, first 3 seasons, like SpongeBob, he was maybe a little bit dim-witted, but more than anything, he's just naive. And he's still naive in this movie. I can kind of relate to that in a way. SpongeBob tries so hard to see the good in everybody that it's easy for him to be manipulated or taken advantage of, and that's still true here in this movie. But he's competent in a way that we've not seen from him in a very long time, because SpongeBob was never meant to be a complete moron like Patrick is. Patrick is, but SpongeBob at least had some intelligence. I mean, like, he could repeat the Krusty Krab employee handbook verbatim. He, in the early seasons, he would always freak out when he got behind the wheel of a boat. He would panic and then he would wreck. But he would ace the test. He knew all the answers. He 100% the test. It was just committed to memory. So SpongeBob can be smart, and he was smart in the early seasons. And so this movie, I feel like, kind of brings that back, where again he's pretty integral to the plot. He, pretty early on in the movie, it establishes that SpongeBob's been like reading this like psychology book to just understand people's reasons for doing the things that they do. So throughout the whole movie, he's Plankton's therapist, and he's like, SpongeBob, and they kind of, again, it kind of adds a little bit of levity. They give SpongeBob like a mustache and kind of a German accent, and Plankton sits down in one of those big chairs where you lay back, and it's like, okay, so tell me, how you and Callan, first met, and SpongeBob's talking with that accent. And he'll like hypnotize Plankton into like, being able to have like a flashback to, all these different events. And the flashbacks are fun because they have like maybe not all of them, but a lot of them have a unique animation style. So one of the flashbacks is like in black and white, and it's kind of like a, old like 1930s like rubber hose animation cartoon, like a classic Mickey Mouse short or like Cuphead or something. So that was really fun. I like to see that. There was another flashback that kind of looked more standard, like, your traditional 2D animated SpongeBob episode, but it was kind of more stylized with more, like, vibrant, like, neon colors and stuff. Because I should say, and we'll talk more about that later, but this is a CG movie. It's 3D animated. But I like how during the flashbacks you have like a animation change, animation style change, and you get that classic 2D feel, even if it's not the exact same animation style as the show. It still looks really good. So I like that. But yeah, SpongeBob is like pretty competent here. He dives deep into Plankton's psyche to help him understand like what's going on inside. And there's a couple parts where SpongeBob like genuinely like becomes aware that Plankton is like manipulating him and kind of like goes off on Plankton, which again, it's like I'm not used to seeing that from SpongeBob. But yeah, like he realizes at one point, like you lied to me, Plankton. Like you've been manipulating me, and he just up and like leaves for a little while, and Plankton's on his own for a few minutes. It's like it's so rare that we get that level of awareness out of SpongeBob, but it's always very satisfying. Same with like Mr. Krabs. Like most of the time, SpongeBob is so just blissfully unaware of just how much Mr. Krabs takes advantage of him. Working him and Squidward just for paying them in pennies, or in some cases making them pay to work there. Like how SpongeBob is emotionally abused by Mr. Krabs, really, and Squidward and all these characters. So it's real satisfying. Like if you have an episode like the one where Squidward, quits the Krusty Krab and he becomes homeless and he has to live with SpongeBob, and SpongeBob doesn't want to accept the fact that Squidward has taken advantage of him. Then eventually he snaps and he runs to the Krusty Krab. He gets Mr. Krabs in like a chokehold and holds him up. He's like, "Don't you get it, you crustaceous cheapskate? Squidward's been living at my house driving me crazy, and you're not going to take him back all because of a stupid dime." It feels good. It's very cathartic as the audience to see SpongeBob in those fleeting moments that's very few and far between. I think that's part of what makes it so satisfying, is because it is such a rarity when SpongeBob just goes off on somebody and he's like, "Listen here, you blankety blankety blank. Well, Mr. Krabs, you want to know what I think? Oh, ragga fragga fada wada, Mr. Krabs. Mr. Krabs wallet." So you see SpongeBob do that with Plankton in this movie, and it makes you feel good. It's like, yes, SpongeBob. Yeah, and also in the movie, he pretty well tells Plankton at one point, he's like, "This is all your fault. You did this. You pushed Karen to this point. Everything that is, Bikini Bottom is in ruins, and like, we're all probably going to die, and it's your fault, Plankton." So I love seeing SpongeBob have that level of awareness. So yeah, that's all really good stuff. Again, writing up to kids, not down. They don't have to dumb down SpongeBob into this very one-note character that doesn't have a backbone ever. But yeah, it was really good. What else do I have here in my notes? I think it's all just on this one page here. So I think that's most of the things that I like about the movie, and then we'll get into some of the dislikes, which there's really not a whole lot that I didn't like about it. But let me just make sure we touch on everything else that I want to talk about. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the positives. The only other thing to note, they briefly have toward the start of the movie for a couple minutes, you see Spot, which is Plankton's pet that he gets in one of the later SpongeBob seasons, maybe like season 10 or 11. I don't know. That show's been on so long, I've kind of fell out of keeping up with all the SpongeBob episodes. But there's one episode where Plankton gets a pet that's like kind of acts like a dog, like it barks and stuff, but it's like even smaller than him because Plankton is already like microscopic. I don't know if it's like a pet like amoeba or what exactly Spot is supposed to be. But for whatever reason, that character is like stuck around ever since then. They've had multiple episodes with Plankton's pet Spot. Spot even shows up in the last SpongeBob video game that came out, the Cosmic Shake. So for whatever reason, the writers are just they really like Plankton having Spot as a pet. But yeah, so that's so Spot kind of shows up for a minute or two at the start of the movie, and I was kind of like, I hope Spot isn't going to be like a main focus. But pretty quickly they kind of move on. They just acknowledge that Plankton has this pet named Spot, and then we kind of never hear about him again. I'm kind of glad about that because I don't really care about Spot. I'm more care about the characters from the first 3 seasons of SpongeBob. So I'm glad they didn't focus too much on that. Spot doesn't like ruin the show in a way. Like a lot of people talk about, like Fairly Odd Parents jumped the spark when they introduced like Baby Poof, and then like Sparky, like the magic dog, and then like Chloe, the girl Timmy has to share his fairies with. Spot's not really like that. Spot's just kind of there, you know. So it kind of doesn't really add or take away from modern SpongeBob, I guess. But I'm kind of glad that they didn't really focus the movie on Spot, really, because that would have kind of lost me. I'd have been kind of like, eh. But so that's who Spot is. If you watch this movie and you're like, who is that? Why does Plankton have a pet? Um, but yeah, to get into some of the negatives, I didn't really love the animation style for the whole movie because again, it's CG animated. I've always been a stickler for 2D hand drawn animation. I really prefer that. And a lot of the modern SpongeBob, like the newer seasons, look really, really good. Like the hand drawn animation looks really nice. So I would have preferred if they had went in that direction for this movie. I get that if you're having a full hour and 20-minute movie, I think this movie is about like 80 minutes or something like that. That gets expensive to have all of that 2D animation. But on the other hand, it's like it's SpongeBob. He's a cash cow. You're Nickelodeon, a subsidiary of Viacom, which also owns Paramount Pictures and like all this other stuff. So it's like you've got the money, So I don't know. It's kind of like with the Pokemon Company. It's like it's really not that much of an excuse for cheaping out. But they did. But that's okay though, because at the end of the day, the important thing is that if the animated movie has good writing, that's ultimately what matters. I can live with subpar animation. Like probably my favorite Cartoon Network animated series, or at least one of them, is Ed, Ed and Eddie. I loved Ed, Ed and Eddie growing up because I love the voice acting is so good. The writing, it's such a funny show. There's all these great visual gags, but honestly, that show is ugly. Ed, Ed and Eddie, like if you look at the backgrounds, especially in like the early seasons, it's an eyesore. But I never cared as a kid because the writing was so good. It was such a funny show with great voice acting, great characters, great character designs. So yeah, even though the backgrounds were hideous, I still really enjoyed the show. So yeah, this movie, and it's not to say that I hate all CG animation. Honestly, I think the third SpongeBob movie, what was it, A Sponge on the Run, I think, where he's goes on the road trip with Patrick and they're trying to find Gary in like Atlantis, I think, or something like that. I thought the animation looked gorgeous in that. That was a really beautiful looking movie, which that was a movie that was intended to come to theaters that never ended up happening because of COVID. But whereas this one was made with the intention of it being just direct to streaming, Netflix. So if they were gonna go CG, I wish they had given it a bigger budget and made it look like the third SpongeBob movie. Because genuinely, even though it's CG, I think that movie looks gorgeous. There's so much like squash and stretch animation going on that it feels hand drawn. It feels like 2D. The colors are so vibrant. Like if we get more 2D animated movies like that, or like DreamWorks' The Bad Guys, which was also CG, but it's really stylized and it looks like it was hand drawn, then like I'm okay with a future where we don't get really any 2D animated movies in cinemas anymore, which we've really not since I think one of the last ones was like The Princess and the Frog, and that's always just broken my heart because I've never thought CG looked as good. But we've gotten to a point where the technology is getting there. CG is starting to look really, really good now and not have that uncanny valley sort of effect. But this movie, unfortunately, kind of does have that uncanny valley going for it. So, like, the main cast of characters, they look pretty good. The backgrounds look really good. The backgrounds at times almost look on par with, like, the SpongeBob, like the Sponge Out of Water movie. But then a lot of, like, the regular, like, the fish characters, like the Bikini Bottomites, they look pretty rough. Like, they look like NPCs in a video game. Honestly, I think the NPCs in, like, say, SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated, or like the Cosmic Shake, probably look quite a bit better than the the background characters in this movie. So it's kind of a mixed bag where it's like in some ways it's like, yeah, that kind of does look like the third movie, but then in other ways it's like, okay, this looks like a 2010 episode of Fanboy and Chum Chum or something, you know. So I wish the animation was better, but it is what it is. Um, Otherwise, so one thing about this movie that I didn't love, I think you could maybe have a better movie if you'd cut out maybe about 20 minutes and make it a nice even 60-minute, like 1 hour long movie. Because there were some parts in kind of like the latter portion of the second act slash maybe early act three, kind of some more action oriented sequences where I started getting a little bit bored, you know. Um, I started kind of losing my focus a little bit because my attention span, like and maybe that just comes down to personal preferences. I don't necessarily really enjoy long drawn out action sequences. I prefer more dialogue and like seeing the plot move forward and like character development. So if it's just a bunch of like fighting and stuff happening, I start to kind of zone out. There were some pretty good fight sequences though, um, involving the the gal pals, which is something we'll talk about. I didn't really love that aspect of the movie. So the gal pals, I think they could have done without that. I think they could have cut some of that out. But essentially, kind of like early on in the movie, you see that Karen is kind of like hanging out with Mrs. Puff and Sandy Cheeks and Pearl. So the four of them are collectively, they're the gal pals, and they like, hang out and, go out for, girls' night and whatever. Um, I was never really that crazy about their inclusion. I think the movie could have done without them. There's like a helicopter or something passing overhead, so sorry if you can hear that. It felt a little forced. Like it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Like I could kind of get why like Pearl and Mrs. Puff might be hanging out together because Pearl is Mr. Krabs' daughter, and they've kind of established Mr. Krabs and Miss Puff kind of have a fling going on, so it kind of makes sense that Pearl might would want to take or Mrs. Puff rather would want to take Pearl out. For like a girls' night or something. And then I could maybe also see like Karen and Sandy hanging out because like, they're both really smart geniuses, they make inventions. But the four of them together, I just think is kind of weird. Like I don't really know why, Pearl or Mrs. Puff would necessarily want to hang out with Sandy. And I think they definitely wouldn't want to hang out with Karen because like, again, with them being closely associated with Mr. Krabs, and they know that Karen is evil and always trying to steal the Krabby Patty secret formula from him. So it's kind of weird to me that the four of them would like run around together. I don't know. It didn't really make a whole lot of sense. And then at one part of the movie, they kind of have this whole like secret underground gal pals headquarters where they're all like hanging out. It's like, into this like secret, like they drive into this like garage, and then there's this whole elevator shaft. And like if they'd explained it a little bit better, because I could kind of see, well, maybe like Sandy and Karen like build it or something, but they don't really explain it. So it kind of like, so why do they have this like high-tech layer? Like they say it's really just for the, because I was like, oh, are you guys like superheroes? It's almost like the Merma lair or something, like the Bat Cave. But they're just like, no, we just come here to hang out. And so it's just kind of like why I don't really get it. It kind of took away my suspension of disbelief a little bit, kind of pulled me out of the movie and back to reality. And it's like, okay, this just seems a little nonsensical, which I mean, it's SpongeBob. The song says, nautical nonsense be something you wish. But so, yeah, I didn't necessarily, it's kind of nice to an extent to see like Sandy and Mrs. Puff and, Pearl there, but it felt a little unnecessary. I think it would have been a better movie if they had really just stuck to SpongeBob, Plankton, and Karen, and that being kind of the main trifecta. But, I did like during one of the fight sequences, because like they're battling like these Karen clones, and so it's like a 3-on-3 girl fight essentially, because you've got the, Sandy and Pearl and Mrs. Puff, and like during like I said, the fighting sequences I thought kind of drug on some of the action sequences, but I thought it was kind of clever. They did this one thing this like maneuver where Sandy, because she's really strong, she picks up Pearl, who's like the size of a whale, holds her upside down, and like swings her kind of like a golf club essentially, because Pearl kind of looks like that, where she's got like the big long nose that sticks out, and hits Mrs. Puff, who puffs up like a big ball, and then the puffed up Mrs. Puff, crashes into one of the robot Karens and like breaks it or whatever. So that was fun. That was clever. I like seeing that. Them kind of like tie all that together. Sandy's strength and like Mrs. Puff, because like it doesn't feel like like when they beat the robots, it doesn't feel like a Deus Ex Machina where it's like, oh, they just got lucky, or whatever. Like, where did these abilities come from? Like, it was all stuff like, oh, we've seen Mrs. Puff inflate in the show a billion times before. And we've seen Sandy be like strong enough that, yeah, she probably could lift a whale. So just the way they brought all those things together, it was like that was a really clever fight sequence. I liked that. But interestingly, Patrick's in the movie. He gets maybe like 2 lines of dialogue. He's not important at all. Squidward, he might have had a line of dialogue. It had like, Roger Bumpus as Squidward in the credits. But I really don't remember him saying a single line. Mr. Krabs got a few more lines than Squidward or Patrick, because, him and Plankton are arch nemesis, and so at the start of the movie, Plankton's trying to steal his Krabby Patty secret formula. So you got a few lines from Clancy Brown as Mr. Krabs early on, but I really appreciate that they don't really focus too much on like those other main characters. It's really again, I kind of would have liked if maybe Sandy and the rest of the gal pals hadn't been so much of a focus. But I like how none of the other main characters really were either, besides, again, just SpongeBob, Plankton, and Karen. And SpongeBob, again, he felt very integral to the plot because he's kind of being Plankton's therapist throughout the whole thing. But it's still fundamentally a Plankton movie. This is a movie about Plankton, by Plankton, for Plankton. That kind of surprised me. I was like, oh, that's cool. When it got to the movie's credits, it said that the movie, I believe, was written and also either directed or storyboarded by Mr. Lawrence, who, if you don't know, he was a writer on classic SpongeBob. I don't know if he's really written on the more modern ones, but he's always been the voice of Plankton. So I was like, well, if anyone knows and understands Plankton's character, except for maybe, more than anybody, except for maybe the late Steven Hillenburg, it would be Mr. Lawrence, because he's been voicing him for the past 25 years. Again, he was an old writer on SpongeBob. So this is Plankton's movie. It was written, and I think, again, either storyboarded or directed, I forget which, by the guy who has done the voice of Plankton all these years, and I just think that's really cool. When I watch this movie, like, it feels like you're watching fan fiction, and that might sound a little bit like I'm saying something derogatory about the movie, but I mean that in a good way, in the sense that this movie feels like it was written by somebody who had a genuine love and passion about these characters, and not like a corporate, like, forced out sort of thing. Like, this feels like, maybe the executives at Nickelodeon were like, hey, we made this deal with Netflix, we're going to do like a bajillion movies, maybe that did happen, but it feels like the sort of thing that maybe that did happen, and then Mr. Lawrence is like, oh, this is a great opportunity. I've been sitting on this idea for a Plankton story for like 10 years now or so. Like, it feels authentic, like this was genuinely a passion project, and I think that's great. And I hope we get more SpongeBob that feels that way, because there's some seasons of SpongeBob, after the classic first 3 seasons, where you watch it and you think to yourself, are the people who wrote this actually even fans of the source material? Because this just feels so detached from what made SpongeBob great. And again, this movie is very different, but it was really enjoyable. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. One thing I kind of would have liked to have seen that I could have made a little bit better, because the whole movie's kind of focused on Plankton and Karen's relationship dynamic. I think I would have liked to have seen them a little bit dive into ways in which Karen and Plankton were both kind of toxic to each other and had to kind of realize that, because it's really all about throughout this movie the blame being put on Plankton, that he's like the sole problem behind all of this, that he pushed Karen to this point. But there's some stuff in the movie because it's like you definitely can see Karen's perspective, why she feels like Plankton doesn't appreciate her. But there's also like a moment fairly early on when he's trying to steal the Krabby Patty formula from Mr. Krabs, where he looks, he doesn't know where Karen's at. He's like where's Karen? I need her. And he like looks through his like giant telescope or whatever, and so he's like, oh, she's out with her gal pals or whatever. He's like, and Plankton has a line where he says something like, doesn't she realize how important this is to me? Like, like wanting her to be there because like he needs her help, and like doesn't she understand how much this matters to me? So, but I thought they were going to do more to that, but they really don't come back to that. So I think that's a little bit of missed potential there, where it would have been nice to see Karen maybe recognize some of her faults as well, and maybe realize maybe how she was invalidating Plankton's feelings too, and not just him invalidating hers. If they were going to do it the way that they did it, where the blame is put solely on Plankton, I kind of think he needed to be a little meaner to Karen. Because like we've seen in past episodes, Plankton mistreat Karen, but what pushed her into this huge villain arc where she's just like, I'm ready to like murder Plankton and just take over the whole world. I just thought it was a little, I think they could have done a better job setting that up that felt a little bit more natural. Because I feel like what pushed her to her breaking point, which was still kind of, you understand to an extent, but like we've seen in other SpongeBob episodes, Plankton mistreat her worse than he did in this movie. Like there's really a couple episodes where he kind of cheats on Karen. There's one where he literally turns her off, not in like in a literal sense, like he presses the off button on her screen, not like he stops satisfying her in bed. He literally turns her off so he can pursue a relationship with Mr. Krabs' mom. And there's another one where he builds a Karen 2.0 robot and kind of kicks Karen to the curb. And for that whole episode, she's trying to like win Plankton back and stuff. And some way, I forget how the episode ends, but it was kind of, or I forget exactly what happened to cause her to develop amnesia. But something happens and Karen kind of forget. I think maybe her battery dies and Plankton has to replace her battery or something. And like she forgets everything that happened. Like she forgets that Plankton replaced her with like a new model Karen 2.0 robot. Karen's like, I dreamt there were two of me, and he's like, oh, two of you? That's silly. So the episode essentially ends with Plankton gaslighting Karen for everything to go back to the status quo. So yeah, I think if you're not going to do it where Karen acknowledges her faults and Plankton acknowledges his, and they come to a mutual agreement, then I think they should have done it in a way where either they're both at fault or Plankton's at fault, but what he did was way worse. Because again, what he does in this movie is not really nearly on par, I wouldn't say, with the other toxic things he's done to mistreat Karen in the past. So it makes it hard for me to... I feel like we needed something a little bit more to push Karen to her breaking point where she just snaps and just like, that's it, Plankton, like, we're through. I'm like... going bananas. So that's kind of another criticism I had, but on the whole I really enjoyed it. I thought this was a really good movie. If you can just get past the animation, get past like the first 5 minutes, because again it starts off SpongeBob singing this very hokey ragtime song, and it's kind of like ugh, and then you see Spot and it's like, who is this? Why does Plankton have like a pet amoeba dog thing? This is weird. But after the first 5 minutes, the movie, it just goes up from there. Again, it's got some fantastic music numbers, so if you do nothing else, look up the song Say My Name, Karen, and also the song You and Me that plays during the credits, because both of those songs are like so good, like genuinely, like holy cow. I've added these songs to my playlist. I've been listening to them like crazy. I'm obsessed with these two songs of the movie. That might sound very nerdy to say, but like these songs are a freaking bop, man. the whole soundtrack throughout the movie was really good. Like even just like the instrumental stuff. I don't know if like because it's not like the typical like public domain, music that they use in SpongeBob, like licensed music. Like it's like I think maybe they got somebody to compose just like the background music during this movie, but it all sounds really good, very epic in scale. Um, the stakes are very high in this movie because typically in SpongeBob you don't see very high stakes where it's like the highest the stakes were probably in the first SpongeBob movie where it's like Mr. Krabs is gonna die if we don't do this thing in time, get King Neptune's crown back. But then also Plankton, he takes over Bikini Bottom. He brainwashes everybody there, and it's like, yeah, that's kind of high stakes. But in this movie, Karen is like, no, I'm taking over the whole world. Like she very early on in the movie destroys Bikini Bottom, and then she's like, I'm just going up from here, baby. I'm going to the surface. Like we're taking over the human world. In her music number in that song that she sings, that's incredible. She talks about taking over the universe, space and time. It's like the stakes have never felt higher. So Karen is a great villain. It's good to get a new villain in SpongeBob. I mean, she's always been there, but it's always been like working with Plankton. But because like in SpongeBob, you've got Plankton as a villain, and then you've got like I don't know, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy's arch nemesis. You got like the Dirty Bubble and Man Ray and stuff, but that's kind of it when it comes to SpongeBob villains. Really, you don't really have much else. But seeing Karen just fully embrace her dark side here, probably the most compelling SpongeBob villain we've ever had. So I want to see more of that in the future. Even if not with Karen, other villains that aren't just Plankton. Every single movie. But yeah, well, I guess you got the Flying Dutchman too. I forgot about I forgot about him. He's kind of an important SpongeBob villain. He's kind of, I guess, maybe more neutral, if anything. He can, but anyway, it was a really solid movie. Like now, I want Karen in like the next Nickelodeon All Star Brawl game because like she was incredible in this movie. Karen again just stole the show. This is a really solid movie. If I were to rate it, I'd give it probably at least an 8 out of 10. I don't know if I'd go so far as to give it a 9. Maybe an 8.5 out of 10. I don't know. But yeah, it's the best piece of SpongeBob media that I've seen in years, with the exception of like the games. The SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom rehydrated, remake I thought was perfect. I loved that. But yeah, this is a good movie. I think you should definitely check it out. Don't let the animation turn you off from it. But yeah, let me know down in the comments, if you've watched it, what you thought about the movie. Do you agree with me? Do you think I'm overselling it? Was it not really that good and I'm just like gushing about this very average kids movie for small children as a 25-year-old grown man? I don't know. Let me know down in the comments, but I really enjoyed it. So yeah, that's gonna be a wrap, I think, for this video. So thank you guys so very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a like on this video and subscribing to the channel. I would greatly appreciate it. Typically on the channel we do more video game content mostly, but yeah, I'm a really big animation buff as well. So occasionally we'll branch out and do other types of content. I've got another video on the channel where I talk about this upcoming animated series set in Africa coming to Cartoon Network. I think it was called Ianu. Hopefully I'm not misremembering the name. So you can check that video out if you want as well. So yeah, we will occasionally be talking about animation and other things here on this channel. I made sure to wear my 90s Nickelodeon shirt. I'll move the microphone so you can see it there. No SpongeBob on this shirt, unfortunately, but we got Ren and Stimpy, we got Rugrats, All Real Monsters, we got Rocco, Arnold. I don't know why Arnold's shirt is like green. That really bothers me. It's like a teal blue, like aquamarine color. I don't know why they gave him like this lime green. So that's upsetting. See, if they'd made his shirt the same color as this font up here, then that could have. I don't know. Anyway, that's going to be a wrap for this episode, guys. We've talked about the Plankton movie for an hour, which is almost the length of the entire movie. So with all that said, I'll catch you guys later. Bye bye.